Teddy, darling, are you ready? Would you like to introduce our guest and introduce the program? What you want to do? Yeah, okay, are you ready? Okay, here we go. Hello and welcome to Pet Talk with me, Anna, and Teddy. And we welcome our wonderful guest today, who is Ruth Evans. Hello, Ruth.
Hi.
Teddy, are you done? Is there anything else you'd like to say? Teddy would like to say that Ruth is here to talk about horses, and in particular her own, I guess, company or business, which is
Business.
called Ethical Horsemanship. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabella.
Well, you know, I think the name is a good place to start. Ethical Horsemanship. Whatever do you mean?
Horsemanship in this country, and how we view horses, how we train horses, how we interact with horses, has for many centuries been down one road of the horse was a tool used in farming and getting from A to B. It was like your car, and it was a commodity, and it wasn't seen as a living being. It was just a thing that did as you told it to do, and if it didn't, then you beat it until it did, in simple terms. And now, as we move forward into the 21st century, people are seeing horses as beings in their own right, with thoughts and feelings, starting to work to understand them, and also realizing that when we work with horses, particularly if we ride horses, the better we understand them and the better bond we have, then the easier it is actually for us to do what we want rather than fighting. But I mean, because horses are a prey animal, if on the majority of them, if you are violent towards them, will shut down and cower. There are the few that actually fight back, and those are the ones that kill people because they will kick them to death. But that is again a fear response to being abused. But people are beginning to understand, and horse is a big animal. Even a little horse, even a little Shetland horse is, 400, it's about 300 kilos. So you can't argue with them, really. You have to work with them.
I think, there's so many elements here that I'm recognizing, when you're talking about dogs and the journey that we've been making in our relationship with dogs, and how it's that difference between seeing them, as you said, as a commodity, as property, as something that needs to just do what it's told, which is a very, very mechanistic approach to everything, and places us in a hierarchy of power, and everything must fall under that power. We're compared to recognizing that the animal is a sentient being, and that there are feelings, and that there are ways of collaborating together, which means that we're no longer seeing ourselves at the top of the pyramid, but on an equal level, whereby by understanding we are able to work together. And I think that is a huge shift in perspective. And I think perhaps it's the fact that dogs live in the house with us. Maybe that's pushed the change a little bit more, because we love them. We're interacting with them. We're not seeing them so much as working at the moment, and there are downsides to that as well. But it's that relationship has changed somewhat. Whereas horses are still expected by and large to do a job, aren't they?
Yeah, well, yes, I suppose if you think about them riding or doing a discipline, yeah, they are expected to do a job. And also, the dog world in this conversation, because I'm studying to do dogs as well at the moment, the dog world is probably 20 years ahead of the horse world. And the difference between owning a dog and owning a horse is that you don't need to learn how to walk beside your dog. But to ride, you need to be taught how to ride. And it's been taught in a very prescribed way, very rigid, for many, many years. So everybody goes through this system, if you like, of learning it the one way. And you're right, it's all about, you are the boss, you must do as you're told, the dominance theory, all of that. And a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot of people, there are people within the horse world who are very entrenched, and nothing will shift their opinion that horses are stupid, lazy, need to be taught a lesson. For instance, if you're riding your horse and it does not want to walk on, there will be a reason. And it is communicating to you. And because I'm a Tellington Touch equine practitioner, what we're always taught is that all behaviour is a form of communication. Doesn't matter whether it's behaviour you don't want or it's dangerous behaviour or whatever, they are trying to tell you something. Often it will be because they're in pain. Horses hide pain as well, because horses even go to sleep with their eyes open, standing up. So that's to ward off, that's going way back to ward off predators. So horses don't stand there and scream, but they do try and they won't walk as fast. They'll not want to do things, and people see that as lazy and naughty. But actually, they're just trying to say, look, I'm not feeling very well today.
It's the subtlety, isn't it?
Yes, very much so.
It helps sometimes to see the parallels between what you're describing and the human experience, because if we see those parallels, then we're more inclined to recognize that this is what's happening in another being. And when we are in situations where we don't feel free to say no, we might smile, we might not, we might attempt to hide what we are really thinking and feeling. But someone who is adept at reading body language is going to recognize that there is discomfort. For instance, a person might, touch their face or touch their hair. They touch themselves more when they're not comfortable, the equivalent of the dog licking itself, and so on. So what you're describing is very similar. A horse may not feel free to just say, get out, you're in my space, but there might be subtle gestures that say, I'm uncomfortable, or I can't move, or I can't walk without pain. And I think it's learning to understand that communication with another species requires that we watch for these signals. That's really important.
Yeah, and that's the main cornerstone of my work, being a Tellington Touch practitioner, is that we have a big thing about observation. So when I go to a new horse, I want to watch it. I want to watch it if I can in the field. I want to watch it in its stable. I watch the owner lead it up and down. Really interesting to watch the owner as well, because horses will sometimes walk at their owner's pace. So if their owner has mobility issues that they might not even know about, the horse will actually alter its gait. And also, we do I do a lot of observing the horse first to see how it's moving, to see where areas of tension are, and then we can then formulate a plan from there. But you've got to, and also very interesting with horses, that their eyes, the shape of their eye, will tell you often if they're in a lot of pain. So if their eyes are really sort of an almond shape rather than big round eyes, that will often give you a good indication that there's pain and their faces are tense. It will give you a good indication. And then what I do is a combination of body work, groundwork, and then teaching the rider on top as well. And I use touches which affect the fascia. So work at the fascia level. So unlike Kate, who works at a deeper level than me. And then we have a lot of groundwork, and then we use wraps as well, bandages that go around the horse, but just touch, not tightly, elasticated bandages. And it's where the wrap that you will have seen for dogs with fireworks comes from.
You mentioned groundwork, and I understand what that means in the context of dogs. So when you talk about groundwork for horses, what are we looking at?
We're
And
looking at them. Well, for what we do is we take a horse through what we call a labyrinth, which is set out, which is poles on the ground set out in a shape, two U's, one linked to the other, or you can have it open as well. Poles slightly raised in a fan shape, and the idea is to get the horse. The leading methods that we use, which are different from anybody else's, is to get the horse to find his own natural balance, because horses aren't naturally balanced. None of us are really as mammals. And the horse has a disadvantage by having a very long neck and a heavy head at the end, which is a heavy weight. So that throws them off balance. And they often, and then not helped by the fact that they often have a rider on them. Now, if the rider isn't balanced, it then unbalances the horse, which then causes tension patterns in the horse. And then it can't do what the rider wants it to do, because its muscles are all now affected and the rider's not sitting square. So it's very complicated. When you think about a horse and a rider, you've got two biodynamic skeletons that need to move together. But the horse has four legs, so a leg at each corner, but we only have two legs and our head is over the centre of our body. So it's quite a complicated structure too.
but then that makes me think about accidents, people falling off horses or, being thrown by horses. It's making me wonder now, because some people think that, oh, it's very dangerous to ride a horse because obviously you're falling from a great height. But I'm wondering whether it's the human side of it.
It can be, because I use some connected riding techniques as well, which come also from Feldenkrais. But basically, and this will take you'll understand this with Pilates and things. If you are in neutral pelvis, you are much more stable on a horse. And if I pushed you, if you were sat in neutral pelvis, you'd be really stable on a horse. If you were not in neutral pelvis and I pushed you, you would wobble. So it is very much about, but a lot of people don't, or have, this concept isn't talked about much, and it is dangerous to ride horses. And when a horse shies because it's frightened by something, because it doesn't see like us, so it doesn't see in front of it, it sees 180 degrees from the side and round to the back, and each eye sees separately. So it's two sets of information going into the brain rather than one. When they shy, they found that a horse goes from 0 to 60 as it moves across. And then if you fall from 4 feet at 60 miles an hour, you are going to do yourself a nasty injury, because that's just basic physics, isn't it?
So there are different components here. And yes, I knew about, when they get frightened, it's quite dangerous. But I was thinking specifically about what is within our agency, which is how we hold ourselves on the horse. Now wondering, is this actually taught in riding schools? Are people taught that how they hold themselves is going to have an impact on the horse's ability to balance and comfort, which could have an impact on the rider themselves?
Not as much as it should be. There is a friend of mine who has the only connected riding school in the UK, who is teaching this, and people are moving towards that. But again, a lot of riding teaching is focused. They do teach, well, it all depends on your riding instructor. Again, it's like anything in life, isn't it? If you have a good driving instructor, you'll find it very easy to pass your driving test. If you have a bad driving instructor, you might have to take your test 3 times. It all comes down to that. So some people do and some people don't. But the more stable you are on a horse yourself with your own body, the safer you are. And if that makes sense.
Yes, and equally, the more comfortable the horse is.
Yes, because you allow the horse to move. And yes, I mean, a lot of riders will actually stop the horse moving by how they're riding, but they're asking it to go forwards. But they don't realise that what they're doing is actually stopping the horse going forwards because of what they're doing. But so this is the conversation that is starting to happen very, very slowly, that, you've got to understand how the horse moves. I mean, this is why I'm really interested in biomechanics, because if you don't understand how the horse moves, I don't understand how you can really. I mean, a lot of people don't understand how a horse moves, and it's a very odd sensation if you've never sat on one before when they move forwards with you.
We do this all the time in different ways. We can say to a dog, "Come," and meanwhile we're standing directly in front of the dog.
Mm-hmm.
Dog is thinking, "No, you're in my way." So it's one of the things that when I was doing agility with Teddy, suddenly I became aware of how my body might be communicating something very different to what I'm saying, or even the signs that I'm giving him. And so here we are, but and this time it's even more important because you're actually on top of the animal. So there's a direct link between your body and the horse is going to be responding to, I guess, every muscular movement that you make. That makes sense. We talk about in dogs again the fact that we are transmitting through the lead. Here,
yep.
We're actually on top of the animal,
and you're transmitting through the reins. And in fact, with we in connected riding, which we did, there's a technique of combing the reins, but we use it with leading the dogs as well and leading the horses. And you're right, when you have a connection between you and a horse or a dog, you are communicating down that lead, rope, whatever. And also we all have an energy force field in front of us, and you are and horses are really, really attuned into that. So if you approach a horse quickly and sharply, they will back off because they pick up your energy, and because in their heads they're fight and flight. So that's dangerous. So they've got to go. There's no second thinking about it. They don't think, is she in a funny mood today? I don't know. Maybe she's a bit worried. They're like, okay, it's frightening. She's wound up. We've got to go. And off they go. So yes, it's very important. When I was saying about doing the groundwork and getting the horses to balance themselves, so I would lead in a different way from an ordinary person, in the fact that we lead on the side of the halter, because if you pull down on a horse, it creates an oppositional reaction which makes it curve its head, and it puts all tension down its back and all the way to its tail. But also I would stand forwards and to the side to allow the horse to move in its own way and give it some space. But it's important that I'm balanced in my body as well, because if I'm misbalanced, then the horse will be misbalanced. So it's really, you're right, it's really important about how we are and also how we feel. Because if you're with your dog, if you're upset or stressed or whatever, he will pick it up. And the same with horses. But this conversation is getting out there more now, and people are beginning to realise. And people who haven't been sort of drilled in the old system, they're quite much more open to listening. I mean, there is still problems in various parts of riding disciplines, but then if you produce horses for money and somebody else owns your horses and it's your living, and they are expected to do something, that becomes very problematic.
Yes, the impatient side of humanity comes into play there, and it's not going to favor looking at the horse's needs.
No, and because that horse's skeleton doesn't really develop, depending on the breed or the size of the horse, so all their bones don't develop until they're at least 6, but they can be 9. Now, if you've spent £500,000 on a dressage horse, a lot of people want results much sooner, unfortunately. And as I always say, a horse does not know whether it cost £1 or £1 million. It's a horse. It has no idea of all these human things. But unfortunately, that is a factor that, comes into it, sadly.
So you've talked about the need for us to watch the horse and pay attention to the signals it gives. Are there signals that we can really look out for to tell us that you've talked about the eyes, in body language that we can look for that tells us this horse is uncomfortable and I need to back off?
So the way it walks, so the way it moves its hind legs, the way it articulates its hind legs. A horse that is walking well will actually over-track its front hoof prints with its hind hoof prints. So if you watch how its hind legs move, there's a 5-step chart about how a horse's hind leg moves. But if you watch how they're moving, I mean, a horse moves in the same way as a dog moves. So if you watch that, if you see, are the back legs only going halfway under its body when it's walking rather than up to where its front feet should be? How is it holding its head? Is its head very high? And then you can see all the tension down its neck. Can it move left and right easily? Can it easily turn to the left? Can it easily turn to the right? These are all easy ways of finding out if your horse is, and if it's finding that hard, then there is often a physical issue that is going on, sometimes minor, sometimes much more major, that need to be sort of investigated. Also, if you come up to your horse and you're carrying your saddle and it does not want its saddle on, that is a good indicator that it's, and some saddles, there's also the complication of some horses wear saddles that don't fit properly. So if you can imagine they're like an ill-fitting pair of shoes and they are pinching or rubbing, then that in itself can cause a problem as well. So that's why it's a good idea to get a saddle fitted to make sure that the saddle is fitted properly to you and the horse, because that's important as well. It's very complicated, but yeah, those are the easy things you can look at. And just, it's getting to know your horse, like any animal that you interact with. What is the norm for that animal? Are they quieter? Are they lethargic? Are they not feeling well? Are they not eating as much as they normally do? Are all things to watch. And because I mean, every horse is like an individual, is different. There's no, benchmark that says A, B, C, D. And the more you get to know your horse and deepen your bond with your horse, the more rewarding it becomes.
Yes, of course, because that is the nature of relationship. Relationship is rewarding when there is a two-way communication happening between the individuals. You mentioned they might not want the harness. How would a horse show that it doesn't want the harness?
Okay, so if they're tied up, they might pull away, they might lay their ears flat back, which is a threatening response in a horse. I mean, they will pin their ears to their skull and tense their faces. They may turn around and try and bite you. Also, when you put the saddle on, when you go to do the girth up, they might try and bite you. And often, if they, by their hindquarters, if they look a bit sucked in and a bit thin, often that could be due to ulcers. And a horse with ulcers will be like that. Horses get ulcers quite easily through stress. And not all of them are easy to diagnose, but anyway. So it might stamp its feet, it might swing its quarters. If it's a very polite horse, it might just try and step away from you. In the worst case, if it's in a lot of pain, it will fire its back feet at you. So, I suggest you move.
So in that instance, what you have there is a horse that's really desperate to say, yes, I don't want this. I don't want this saddle. Yeah,
because what I learn is that horses all talk in whispers, and they do. But when it gets really bad, they have to shout. So when you've got your horse, a horse that bucks a lot, that's another thing. If you're riding them, they can try and buck. 90% of horses that buck have a back issue.
Yes, I would have guessed that myself.
But the received wisdom is you ride them through it, and you tell them they're naughty, and you hit them and make them go forwards. But people are beginning to understand that, to look for these things. And there is a lady called Sue Dyson who was a well-known vet who's written a book about pain and the signs of pain, which is a really useful protocol to have out there, that's written by somebody that's scientific and, not just me saying all these weird things.
It requires us to be sensitive. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is that it requires us to be sensitive. And I think that many people who are involved and have relationships with animals want to be sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
But don't necessarily know how to be sensitive. And then there are those who are naturally doing it, need to be told because it just feels right.
Yeah.
And then there are those who actually just want what they want. And
it's complicated in the horse world because Teddy lives with you, right? And you decide what Teddy does, and he, a lot of people are not like me. I'm lucky to have my own small holding, but they keep their horse on a livery yard. And on a livery yard, there may be, say, 20 other people, and everyone is an equine expert. And everyone will tell them to do something different with that horse. And if they face a problem, then they'll all be saying, oh, you should do this, you should do that, you should teach him a lesson, blah, blah, blah. Some of them might say, maybe you should get him checked out, etc. But people have a lot of conflicting, particularly if they're new horse owners and they've never had horses before. They've got all this conflicting information coming at them. Who do they believe? What should they do? What's the right thing to do? What's the wrong thing to do? And it's very difficult. And there can be a lot of bullying on livery yards as well, which does not help matters.
No, it wouldn't. And, I think that we all recognize the benefit of other people's ignorance so willingly given to us. I remember that from the days when Teddy was a puppy and everybody wanted to tell me about how he mustn't sleep on my bed and all of that nonsense that goes on. And, new parents are going to hear it. There's always somebody willing to share their ignorance with us. And we have to just say, okay, thank you very much. And then ask the question, what is it that feels right to us? And not allow ourselves to be bullied, because this tends to happen, I think, to the more sensitive amongst
Absolutely. No, I agree with you.
Who are instinctively wanting to be sensitive to the needs of the animal or the child, and who are being told, oh no, you're being too soft, you're being too this, you're being too that, and the consequences are going to be. And actually we need to just step back and think, okay, I have to do what feels right to me, and it doesn't feel right to me to be dominant. It's funny, isn't it, how we have this dominance theory that has so plagued the dog world, and you've used that same thing, same term in.
I think a lot of it is caused by fear, because horses are even bigger than dogs, and the two horses I've got now weigh half a ton each. So even if they accidentally knock me, they can do some damage. They don't mean to. There's no malice in them. But people are then frightened, and if they don't know how to manage a horse that's in pain or upset, or a lot of horses, some horses like dogs lack confidence, and they need their emotional well-being built up and their security built up. And what I do is to enable the horse to find balance mentally, physically and emotionally. So that then means that they can cope with situations better if they are balanced like that. But if you don't know how to cope with that, and your horse is on its hind legs and striking at you with its front feet, and it weighs half a ton, it's a scary place to be. And you could be killed. I mean, you could be killed, with the best will in the world. I could be killed tomorrow. And so I do see where it is born out of fear that they want them to be. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying that.
No, but I completely agree with you. And what is also happening here is a projection. When we talk about, dogs, dominance theory in dogs, dominance, in horses, what we're really actually doing is projecting our desire to be dominant. And and that will come from fear. So in the dog world, it comes from, oh, you know, they're wolves. Ignore, and most people don't know that the studies that were done with wolves have been discredited, oh, for I don't know how long now. But
about 20 years, because they were done in a zoo with wolves that had never been that weren't part of the same pack.
and that we're under stress, and so, you know, so we know that that's been discredited, but many people don't, and so the theory persists, and I think it's an attractive theory because it's something that it's the way that many human brains work. It's not the way that the dog's brain works, it's the way that, so it's easy to project that, and you can see that with horses, as you say. With dogs, it's the teeth and
Yeah.
and the muscle behind them, and with horses, it's the size. And so, yeah, that's right. We have other species on this planet that are very, very powerful, and we need to learn how to work with them and communicate with them rather than allow our fears to, you know, lead us to want to basically dominate, which leads to it's
Well,
time
I'll give you an example. I have got a horse that's got a very rare condition. So she broke her neck in April, at the base of her neck, in C6, but it's left her with something called sidewinder syndrome, which is incredibly rare, where the horse will put one of its hind legs out to the side and put its other hind leg under the center of it. And when it walks, its front legs go one way and its hind legs go the other way. And they also spin. So she is on borrowed time, but she seems well enough in herself. So anyway, I can no longer lead her really because she finds that very hard and I can only lead her from the one side. But because we have built up, she's nearly 17, and I've had her since she was 3. Because we've built up such a good relationship, I can manage her without a head collar. And we work together. And she can't stop herself spinning when she does a total spin in a circle. But when she's done a circle, then she stops and she avoids me every time. And it's because we've built up such a good bond over time. And I respect her. She obviously respects me because she does her best not to avoid me. I don't expect her to respect me. That's another thing. But I wouldn't, she probably still wouldn't be here if we hadn't built up this understanding. But because we have, she can go out in the field and I'll call her and she can come in and she follows the fence in, bless her, and then she has a tea. And we work with taking her rugs on and off because she gets colder because she can't stand as well as she could. And we work together. But if I hadn't developed that bond, and also in terms of the observation, so I'm observing her every day to see, is she really still comfortable? Is she really still happy with life? Because I'm not a believer in keeping animals going for my personal gain. It's for what's best for them, which is when I talked about my conversation with Andy Hale. I lost a horse in April. I had to have put down. In fact, I thought I was going to have this other one put down at the same time as her, because she had been neglected, and although a nice lady had bought her in the UK, she'd come over from Portugal. Basically, her stifle bones were rubbing on each other, her knee was rubbing on each other, and she was in so much pain. It wasn't fair. I mean, technically, I could have kept her going, but I mean, we tried some treatment, it didn't work, and it just wasn't, she was in so much pain. I have never met such a, and saying about observations, she's a really good horse to learn from. When she first came to me, she had very bad ulcers, and she would launch herself across the stable and she would go for the back of your neck to bite. She was like a dog. She really made her feelings clear. She was a breed called a Lusitano that were bred in Portugal for bullfighting. So her default was to go forwards to things rather than backing away. But she was a great teacher, bless her. But I've never had a horse in that much pain as she was for so long. And you couldn't touch her. The method I used, we can do air touches, so I had to do those near her. But that was all through observations, because other people would have just said she's naughty, and one of the things that people do when horses bite them is to hit them across the nose. But she was shouting, "I'm in pain, I'm in pain." So but then that goes back to the whole observations thing, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And how fortunate for her to have found you. You know, I think that's a very illustrative example that you've given there, exactly of what you're talking about. And I think that it's very clear that when we establish a relationship with animals, that we are able to help them much more easily than not. And equally, they help us. I once or twice, Teddy have gone off piste in woodland, and I have struggled a little bit to find the right path. And guess who's helped me? It's been Teddy, and he's picked out, you know, safe paths too, because once or
Mhm.
twice we're on paths that had a very steep fall, you know, towards a cliff.
Yeah.
And I remember the very first time that ever happened, he was only about 3.5. And I was debating whether it was safe to have him off lead or whether he should be on lead. And if he was on lead, things were very slippery. And if he pulled, I might fall. What was the safest? There I am debating it. And it became clear that I had to let him off. And so I let him off. He took one look at me and found a better path and kept looking back to check on me. He took the lead and he was checking on me. And so that it only happens because of all the wonderful fun we've had doing parkour and agility and working together. And I almost get very emotional when I think about that the beauty of that working together, just like you're describing in a very different context
Mhm.
with your horses there. So I so admire your work, and I am so grateful for the fact that you have been here talking about it with us today. Thank you so much, Ruth. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
They can find me on Facebook at the moment because I've just had a lot of problems with my email and accounts and things. So yeah, I can be found on Facebook just if you just look for my name.
I'll put a link to it in the description box so that people can find you very, very easily. Thank you once again, Ruth.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. Next time, we're going to be looking at bull breeds in dogs. Until then, goodbye.